قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، قال الإمام البخاري رحمه الله في كتاب الصوم باب هل يقال رمضان أو شهر رمضان ومن رأى كله واسعا. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من صام رمضان وقال لا تقدموا رمضان. حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن جعفر عن أبي سهيل عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا جاء رمضان فتحت أبواب الجنة. حدثني يحيى بن بكير قال حدثني الليث عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب أخبرني ابن أبي يونس أو ابن أبي أنس مولى التميمين أن أباه حدثه أنه سمع أبا هريرة رضي الله عنه يقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دخل شهر رمضان فتحت أبواب السماء وغلقت أبواب جهنم وسلسلة الشياطين. حدثنا يحيى بن بكير قال حدثني الليث عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب قال أخبرني سالم أن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا رأيتموه فصوموا وإذا رأيتموه فأفطروا فإن غم عليكم فاقدروا له. وقال غيره عن الليث حدثني عقيل ويونس لهلال رمضان. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala says in chapter number 5 in the book of fasting, هل يقال رمضان أو شهر رمضان ومن رأى كله واسعا. Says, should a Muslim or can a Muslim say Ramadan or the month of Ramadan, or those who have the view and the opinion that it's no problem saying either of the two. In other words, is it permissible to say Ramadan is coming? Ramadan has come. Are you going to fast in Ramadan? My wife has to feed in Ramadan. My wife is not fasting in Ramadan. Or is it mandatory that you say the month of Ramadan? And you can't just give it a title Ramadan, but you must call it Shahr Ramadan. Those who say that it is haram, and those who say that it's permissible or disliked, and why. So Bukhari rahimahullah, he doesn't give you the permissibility or the impermissibility directly, but he first presents the issue. He presents the issue, and then he gives you a very subtle trick. A very subtle trick. He says, وَقَالَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Men Sama Ramadan. He who fasts Ramadan. He doesn't say the month. And then he says, and the Prophet also said, La taqaddamu. He said, do not begin Ramadan with a day or two of voluntary fasting or fasting. In other words, as if he's clearly saying and pointing out that view stating that you can't say Ramadan and you have to say the month of Ramadan isn't what? Isn't impermissible, isn't correct. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ did not say all of the time. Everybody understand this. He then says here, he now gives you his isnad after he gave you two hadiths without the chain of narration. So it goes to show you that every hadith in Sahih Bukhari is not necessarily with it isnad. Even though there are other places in which these hadiths are mentioned with their isnads, but here, Imam al-Bukhari, in this chapter, he doesn't want to present to you the hadith and the hadith science. He's trying to prove a point. He's trying to what? Prove a point. He's trying to make a fiqh point. Istinbat. He's trying to show you why something is halal or why something is weak. He says, reported to us Qutaybah who said, related to us Ismail ibn Ja'far from Abi Suhail from his father, that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu reported the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, when Ramadan comes, the gates of paradise are opened. When Ramadan comes, the gates of paradise are opened. And he mentions another hadith reported to us Yahya ibn Bukayr, who said that Layth reported to us from Uqayl, from Ibn Shihab, yani Zuhri, the famous tabi'i who was responsible for compiling and writing down much of the hadiths by the command of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, Zuhri, rahimahullah, the teacher of Imam Malik. He says here, أخبرني ابن أبي أنس مولى التيميين. He says that his father reported from him, from Abu Hurairah, he heard from him that the Messenger of Allah say, or he heard the Messenger of Allah saying, when the month of Ramadan comes. Now the hadith says, Shahru Ramadan. The gates of the heavens are opened, and the doors of hell are shut, and the shayateen, the devils, are put into fetters. Then he mentions another hadith, reported to us Yahya ibn Bukayr, who said that Layth ibn Sa'd related to me from Uqayl, from Ibn Shihab. Ibn Shihab is who? Zuhri. He's a Zuhri, rahimahullah. Related from Salim, who heard Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, or Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma said, I heard the Messenger of Allah saying, when you see it, then fast, and when you see it, break your fast. And if it's cloudy, then estimate the amount of days. And others from the students of Layth ibn Sa'd, they said that Uqayl said that Uqayl and Yunus said, Lihilal Ramadan, the crescent moon of Ramadan. So what do we take from these three hadiths? Or five of them actually. We take from these hadiths the permissibility of saying Ramadan without giving it the title what? Shahr. The Shahr, the month. And it's permissible to say what? Ramadan or Shahr Ramadan, both of them. Everybody understand this? That you do not have to necessarily say the month of Ramadan. And some Muslims, they may say that you can't say Ramadan. You hear this? They say you must say the month of Ramadan. You cannot say Ramadan. Don't call it Ramadan. Call it the month of Ramadan. But why? What is this? What is the reason behind this? There's a reason why. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, وأشار البخاري بهذه الترجمة إلى حديث ضعيف رواه أبو معشر النجيح المدني عن سعيد بن مقبول عن أبي هريرة مرفوعا لا تقولوا رمضان فإن رمضان اسم من أسماء الله ولكن قولوا شهر رمضان. وأخرجوا ابن عدي في الكامل وضعفوا بأبي معشر. قال البيهقي قد روي عن أبي معشر محمد بن كعب وأشبه، وروي أو روى عن مجاهد الحسن من طريقين ضعيفين، وقد احتج البخاري لجواز ذلك بعدة أحاديث انتهى. وقد ترجم النسائي بذلك أيضا فقال باب الرخصة في أن يقال شهر رمضان ورمضان. ثم أورد حديث أبي بكر مرفوعا لا يقولن أحدكم صمت رمضان ولا قمته كله. وحديث ابن عباس عمرة في رمضان تعدل حجة أو حجة. وقد يتمسك للتقييد بالشهر بورود القرآن به حيث قال شهر رمضان، مع احتمال أن يكون حذف لفظ شهر من أحاديث من تصرف الرواة، وكأن هذا هو السر في عدم الجزم المصنف بالحكم. ونقل عن أصحاب مالك الكراهية وعن ابن الباقلاني منهم وكثير من الشافعية أن كان هناك أو إن كان هناك قليلا من التصرف في الشهر فلا يكره، والجمهور على الجواز. He says here, this means, is it permissible to say Ramadan without saying the month of Ramadan, Shahr Ramadan? And why is this? Why do the ulama even differ over this? Why is this even important? He says here, there's a hadith that states that Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, do not say Ramadan, but Ramadan is one of Allah's names. So don't call it Ramadan, but call it the month of Ramadan. This is one of the reasons why some of the people of knowledge have the view that it's impermissible. or at least disliked, to say Ramadan, because it's one of Allah's names. Having respect for the what? The names of Allah. And there's also another reason why they say you shouldn't say it. Why is that? Because they say in the Quran, Allah called it the month of Ramadan. And He never called it Ramadan. So, you see the point that I'm trying to get to is that before moving any further, how reading the books of Hadith, the explanations and the arguments and the comparative fiqh, it makes you more intelligent because you start thinking about things that you never thought about, but were there. You just never were trained to think about it like that. Everybody understand this? And we said that knowing that something is an issue in itself is a level of ilm. Just to know that something is an issue, let alone the difference of opinion, what's the correct view, but just to know something is what? An issue in itself is a level of ilm. So there's the two reasons why they say you should not say Ramadan. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says that the chapter heading of Imam al-Bukhari was to point out the weakness of this hadith. To point out the weakness of this hadith. As we explained before, the Sahih Bukhari is a book of establishing, and it's also a book of demolishing. He establishes things and he breaks other things. He puts together, fixes things, establishes things, builds things, and he also breaks things. So the Bukhari gives you the fa'idah, what is sahih, and is also directly or indirectly telling you that which isn't sahih. That which isn't sahih, as we explained before. So as if al-Bukhari said that that's weak, that view is weak, and the hadith is weak because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So everybody understand this concept here of critiquing the hadiths. And this also shows us how the ulama of hadith refuted and criticized the content of the hadith as well. And it wasn't just criticism of the chain of narration, but they also critiqued the content, the metin, the wording of the hadith. They knew and they understood the hadith, what it meant, and they accepted it and they rejected it based off of both the isnad and the actual metin. And they critiqued the metin. Not like the Orientalists and the ignorant Muslims who followed them, and some of the people who apostated from Islam and said that the scholars of hadith only looked at the chains of narrations. They only critiqued the chains of narrations. And Muslims cannot take hadiths because we don't know what is fabricated and what's not. And the scholars of hadith, they were just mules and donkeys. They just looked at the men, the narrators. He's a liar, he's trustworthy, accept it, don't accept it. And that they didn't have fiqh. They didn't understand what was being said to them. And they accept the narrations that were bogus and fabricated just because the chain of narration was authentic. That's false. That's false. Right here in this book, Imam al-Bukhari talking about the actual metin, the text of the hadith. The Prophet said on several occasions, Ramadan, so that proves that the other hadith, along with this chain, which is already messed up, is also messed up. It's not authentic because of the text. It doesn't make sense. The Prophet called it Ramadan in so many authentic hadiths. Then we have a hadith that says, don't say Ramadan because one of Allah's names. That shows that that hadith is weak, and the Prophet did not say those words. Everybody understand this? So the scholars of hadith understood what they narrated, and they critiqued what they narrated, and it was just not based off of the chain. Khairan, inshallah. So Ibn Hajar, he says that Imam al-Bukhari is pointing out the weakness of this hadith, who's reported by Abu Ma'shar from Muhammad ibn Ka'b. He says Abu Ma'shar, whose name is Najih al-Madani, from Sa'id al-Mukhbari an Abi Hurairah, and then the hadith is not sahih. And then he goes on to say that some people who say that you should say the month of Ramadan is because it's mentioned in the Quran, as we said. And then he said perhaps some of the narrators, they changed it. That the Prophet ﷺ actually said the month of Ramadan and they just summarized it. That's weak. That's not sahih. That's not sahih. It's not, you can't say that about so many hadiths. It's not just one narration, 2, 3, 4. It keeps going on and on and on. They said Ramadan. And also the default is that the narrator, who's trustworthy and strong, didn't make a mistake and didn't change the words. That's the asl. That's the default. And that just goes to show you that if you have if a person has a presupposed opinion, pre-assumption, then they go around and wiggle and jiggle to get around the text. If a madhab is, it's what? It's a consecrated thought in one's mind that this is correct, this is the way. My imams, my views, so on and so forth. And then they look to, well, perhaps from the hadith is meaning by verbatim. Perhaps hadith, perhaps. Based off of the cup already being full. Everybody understand this? And that's not correct. Everybody clear on this. He then goes on to mention, and perhaps this is why the author didn't necessarily say that it's permissible. And that's weak as well. Rather, Imam al-Bukhari's way and style of speaking is subtle like this. Khayr inshallah. So that's not sahih. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he then says, the students of Imam Malik, they said that Imam Malik said that it was disliked. That it was what? That it was disliked. And then he says, some of the Shafi'i ulama, not Imam Shafi'i, but some of them, they say, if there's, and he gives details. He says most of the ulama hold the view that it's permissible and that it's not haram. Khayran inshallah. He then says, واختلف في تسمية هذا الشهر رمضان فقيل لأنه ترمض فيه الذنوب أي تحرق لأن رمضاء شدة الحر وقيل وافق ابتداء الصوم فيه زمانا حارا والله أعلم. He says, and then they differ over what's meant by the term Ramadan. Ramadan. Ra meaning Dad, Alif and a Noon. Why is it called Ramadan? What's meant by Ramadan? Arabs, they called their months, or they gave their months names with appropriate meanings. Just like other people gave names to the months with appropriate meanings as well. January, February, March, December, April. It's a reason why they named those months those names. And it's a reason why the Arabs gave those names to the Islamic months. Muharram. Why is it Muharram? What's haram about the month? What's meant by Rajab? What's meant by Safar? Rabi'ul Awwal. What is meant by that? Why? What's the foundation behind that title? So Ramadan is very important because you say terms that you say your whole life as a Muslim. And you don't have to know the meaning, but you grow in knowledge. You grow in yaqeen. I've been a Muslim 30 years. I've been saying Ramadan. I don't know what it means. Everybody understand this? It's a fa'idah for your deen. What does Ramadan mean? So we have Ramadan. We have how many letters? What's the asl of the word? 3. Ra, Meen, and what? Dad. Ramadan. Ramadan. The Alif and the Noon are extra. He says, first and foremost, some people say, is that sins are burnt up. Sins become, they're burnt and they're done away with. And that is because the word Ramadan is when it's very hot outside. Or, in a hadith it says, Salat al-Awwabin hina, the salah of those who turn into repentance is when the what? When it's hot. What is hot though? What's the actual wording of the hadith? Tarmut. It says the feet of the camels are what? Start to get burnt in the sand. In other words, the 3 letters, the verb, Ramadan, pertains to hot sand. When the sun is beaming, the temperature is rising, the sand gets hot and uncomfortable to stand on. So the linguistic concept of those 3 letters, Ra, Mim, and Dad, means something that's what? Hot. So he says that sins are burnt up like an incinerator inside of Ramadan. Just like the Arabs talk about the hot sand. It's too hot to walk on. Everybody understand this? It's the first concept of the meaning. And others, they say that Ramadan was given to Ramadan because its legislation was sent down in a time that was very hot. Ramadan was legislated when? When it was hot, in a hot month, in the summer. What month was it sent down in? What month was the legislation of Ramadan sent down in?
شهر رمضان.
You're not on Bukhari's madhab. You go with the fiqh madhabis. Was it sent out in Muharram or was it sent out in Ramadan? What year? What year was Ramadan become, what the year did it become legislated? When did it become mandatory? When did it become from the deen to fast in Ramadan? Nobody know. Nobody take a guess. After Hijrah. Very good guess. After the Hijrah. Right, I sent. But when? After Hijrah. So over 10 years after the Hijrah.
Second year.
Second year, exactly. See how easy that was? Just give it a shot. Tayyib is also the year of what? Battle of Badr. Khayr. Ahsant. Khayr, inshallah. So therefore, Ramadan was sent down in the second year of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Hijrah. Tayyib. So we understand and we benefited so far that it's permissible to say Ramadan is Ramadan without saying Shahr Ramadan. Without having to say the month of Ramadan. It's permissible to say what? Ramadan. It's not haram, and that hadith is extremely weak. We also benefited the way of saying or the meaning of the word Ramadan. It has something to do with burning. It has something to do with heat. The month of heat, the month of hotness, the month of burning. In other words, the sins are what? Burnt away, like an incinerator. Sins are done away with. Get rid of them, turn them to ashes, clean yourself up. Or sauna. You go inside, you put in a sauna and you get what? You get lean. You lose some weight. Get rid of the excess what? Weight. Get rid of your gut nafis. Your love rules on the side. Or people when they run, they put on those suits. They do what? They sweat. Make themselves hot. To get rid of the burn off the fat. So here you have sins which are very similar to body fat. What body fat does to your endurance, what it does to your stamina, what cholesterol, what do these things do to your heart? Slow up your heart, slow up your organs. The fat, it makes you slower and sluggish. And similarly, sins, they do what? Slow you down as well. Bear you down, weigh on your back heavily. Make your ibadah slower. Your stamina for ibadah slower. I can't get up, I can't sleep, I can't do this, I'm too much, I'm tired. It's not because your body is physically incapable, it's because of sins. Sins beat down your spirit for ibadah. So the month of Ramadan is the month of what? Burn it, sweat it off, burning calories. Everybody understand this? Now peace? Khayr inshallah? Khayr. Then Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, he quotes those other hadith with regards to the devils being chained down and being locked up. And perhaps we'll mention that in another time. Very important concept. What's meant by those hadiths? That the devils are chained up. What is meant by that? Very important. But we'll stop here. Wallahu a'lam.